Hello and welcome to the Chicago Humanities Festival and today's program, a conversation with Senator Tammy Duckworth. Before we get started, a couple notes about accessing programming. All digital events have captioning, which can be controlled through YouTube. You can learn more about upcoming events, virtual and in person, and help support the festival at chicagohumanities.org. My name is Isabelle Alter. This annual lecture honors Joanne Alter, my grandmother, and her groundbreaking work on behalf of women in government and politics. On behalf of my family, thank you for joining us to celebrate her commitment to social action and public service. I grew up hearing family lore about the many battles Nanny Jo fought. A favorite story was about her confrontation with the first Mayor Daley, which ultimately led to her run for a metropolitan sanitary district and her time there as the first Democratic woman to hold elected office in Cook County. This was such a popular family story that we reenacted it at our Thanksgiving skit one year, complete with grandkids playing miniature members of the Chicago political machine. I heard stories about her environmental advocacy and success in cleaning up the Chicago River and her unwavering support for the leaders she believed in. We, Joanne's kids, grandkids, and mentees, continue to draw on these anecdotes to remember her work in life and to motivate our own. Earlier this month, I was considering what to say about Joanne and the impact she had in my life and the lives of so many others. I kept thinking about the first time I went to a big protest. It was 2004 and I just turned 9. My mom and I flew from where we lived in Arizona to Washington, D.C., where we met Joanne and my cousin at the March for Women's Lives. I remember her telling me about the many other marches for women's rights and health she'd participated in. At 9, decades of advocacy and protest seemed like an impossibly long time. I recently realized that if you start counting from 2004, I'll be reaching multiple decades soon myself, with so much more work still to do. Today, we face the most aggressive restrictions on reproductive access in my lifetime, and we need more advocates like my grandma, who never gave up, no matter how many marches had to be organized, campaigns run, doors knocked, no matter how many decades it took or setbacks she faced. Senator Duckworth is one of those advocates. She's been a champion for women since her time as director for Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, and through her time as a congresswoman and senator, including using her experience as the first senator to give birth while in office to advocate for working moms. Please help me in welcoming CHF's Artistic Director, Alison Cuddy, and Senator Tammy Duckworth.
Thank you so much, Isabelle, and thank you to the Alter family for your continued support of this ongoing exploration of the experiences of women in politics. And welcome to you, Senator Duckworth. It is such an honor to be able to talk with you and a pleasure to feature you as the 2021 Alter program at CHF.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. I look forward to our conversation.
Likewise. So Joanne Alter was clearly a trailblazer in Illinois politics. But as I look at your career, as we all do, you too, what you've accomplished can be defined by a series of firsts, having to do with the fact that you're a woman, but other things as well. And this is across your service in the military and holding political office. So, you were among the first women to fly a combat mission in Iraq. You were one of 2 Asian Americans to serve as senator, 2 Asian American women to serve as senator, that is. You were the first senator in office to give birth and the first senator to bring your infant daughter onto the floor of the Senate for a vote. And so, I mean, those are incredible accomplishments. It's great to achieve first, but at the same time, this is the 21st century. And I wonder, does it feel frustrating to you that these are still firsts that have to be accomplished?
Very much so. I wasn't setting out to be the first of anything. I was just trying to live my life and pursue my career. As a young officer in the military, when I was choosing what job I wanted to do, I was told I couldn't choose combat jobs because women weren't allowed in combat. And I thought that was a little bit crazy because women were already in combat. It was an artificial, demarcation that existed. And so I was among the first women to fly combat missions in Iraq because that was the first war we had since we allowed women to fly in combat, which began in 1993. While I was in flight school was when they opened up those jobs to women. And so, yeah, that has been my frustration, that it's taken so long, to have the first senator give birth. Now, don't get me wrong, the men have been having babies for 200 years, but it's only now that we have actually elected enough women to have in that cohort of women, a woman young enough to have a child. And listen, I'm not a young mom. I'm a new mom, but not a young mom. I had that first child 2 weeks after I turned 50, thanks to IVF. So what we need to do is actually help more women achieve, what they want to achieve in their lives. And hopefully that'll include a cohort of women who want to serve in government so that we can actually get more senators of childbearing age, because I think that'll make a difference for the American people in general to have that variety of experiences.
Yeah, I think one of the things I appreciate, and many people appreciate about you, is taking a very holistic view of reproductive health for individuals. So thinking about things like fertility, IVF, or thinking about even just the conversation around miscarriages or things like that, that aren't things that we feel totally comfortable talking about publicly. We're in a moment where reproductive health is very much on the political stage depending on your point of view, in a very challenging way. And I'm talking about the recent law that went into effect in Texas, which essentially would ban abortions after 6 weeks. The Department of Justice has just issued an emergency injunction asking for a temporary halt to the law. What are your thoughts about what's happening in Texas right now?
Well, I think it's atrocious. The law was designed specifically to take away the rights of women, not just their reproductive rights, but also to seek justice under our judiciary. Because what it does is that it actually was written in a very devious way to say that members of the Texas government, so government employees, could not take away your right, to seek an abortion, for example. But what it does, allows people to sue those who help a woman to access abortions. They could sue your Uber driver, your Lyft driver under this law, even if they unknowingly drove you to a clinic. And so it was really very specifically written in a way to avoid being something that we could pursue our rights under the judiciary. So it's not just about reproductive rights. It's about a way of writing legislation that denies, in this case, women access to one of the three pillars of our government, to our judiciary. And so if they can do this for abortion, they can do this for any other number of causes that are out there. And that is the slippery slope. That is a thing that we must be very, very careful could be happening, because they could do this to take away your rights to any number of issues, not just reproductive health.
Right, and Texas is not the only state that is, passing laws that restrict, and this has been going on for a long time, access to abortion or reproductive health in general. You've talked about this yourself. I mean, what you were able, thanks to Planned Parenthood, able to get access to healthcare when you didn't have, when you might not have been able to otherwise. So even if this law is designed to, limit our access to justice, is it meaningful that it begins with women, with reproductive health, with abortion?
Very much so. It very much is very meaningful that it starts with taking away women's most basic rights of control over our bodies. Now, this Texas law would have affected me in a way that I don't think people who say they are pro-life. Now, I don't know anybody who's not pro-life. I am pro-life. I'm also pro-choice. I want to live. I want everyone to live. But I experienced a miscarriage at 9 weeks. That's 3 weeks beyond the 6-week limit. And I had a heartbeat at 6 weeks, but at 9 weeks, they could no longer find the baby, and I had a miscarriage, and I had to have a D&C. In order to be able to start my IVF cycle again as soon as possible, so that I could actually attempt to get pregnant. So this law could, if I've been in Texas and it happened now, would have prevented me, I think. And we're still trying to figure this out, from being able to have the medical procedures I needed in order to start a family, in order to try to get pregnant. And there are so many unintended consequences. And I think it is significant that they're going after women first and our rights over our bodies. And you're also seeing these attempts to take away people's rights when it comes to the right to vote as well. And they're not targeting, white men. They're targeting minorities and minority communities and those who are of the lower socioeconomic portions of our country that the most vulnerable are the ones that are the target of these really heinous laws.
Do you see family parenting, however that's defined, right? Whether you're raising your own children, you're caring for your parents, or you're looking after someone else's children. Do you see any way in which family and caring for working families is a space where Republicans and Democrats can come together and work together? Are you seeing that happen at all in government at this time?
I would like to see it happen. I don't know if the Republican Party, as it stands, is willing to go there. I hope that there's some Republicans who will stand up to this, but I do think that the well-being of our families affects our national well-being, affects our economic growth and our economic competitiveness. We've seen in 2020, during the height of COVID, with so many women who worked outside of the home, once you lose childcare, they can no longer, once all those childcare centers shut down, and many of them went out of business, and we still don't have enough childcare. Those women are not going back to work, not because they don't want to go to work, it's because they don't actually have childcare. We don't have enough childcare in this country. So we're losing the productivity of that portion of our economy. So how do we compete against a nation like Germany or Norway or some of these other countries that have good childcare if we can't actually free up our workforce to go to work because they are stuck providing childcare or spending, such a substantial amount of their income, their family's income, on childcare that it's no longer financially feasible to work outside the home.
Do you see that? Do you see how do we compete against countries like Germany or Norway where they have more family-friendly policies? Do you see the United States falling behind European countries, not being as competitive as a country like Germany?
What I see is the loss of talent. I know a lot of young women who have left the United States. A lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Zers who are looking abroad and saying, I don't want to have to go through this fight that my parents, whether my mother or my grandmother went through, when I can just go to work in Germany, or I can even, I can move over there and work and get all the support that I need. So we are actually losing the talent pool. We also have folks who come here to America's really excellent schools, but then they don't stay. Right? They don't want to live here and live under the laws that affects their ability to have families. I remember when I started trying to have a baby, and I talked to my gynecologist, and at the time I was 42, and I said, I'd like to try to have a baby, and she said, well, it's going to be hard for you, but we're gonna start this journey together. And what she said to me just struck me in the heart to this day. She said, we professional women, we delay our fertility for the benefit of our careers. And she was a VA doctor, and she said, and you delayed your fertility for the benefit of the country to serve. And so now we find ourselves in our 40s, she was in her 40s as well, facing infertility. And so we have to see this as, we have to support the whole person, and we can't lose the productivity of 51% of our workforce and think that we're going to be competitive on a global scale. We're not.
So what are some of the policies, as you think about, again, the first that you were able to accomplish, to acknowledge that you are a senator who has children and childcare as a part of what you need to do? What are the policies that you want to see, that you're working on, put in place, that can support families, that can support parents and caretakers?
Well, so several things. I mean, overall, it's the universal childcare. It's universal pre-K. We know that children who attend pre-K or a Head Start program have much higher literacy rates in the 4th grade. And 4th grade literacy rates actually predicts completion of graduation from high school. So it's in our nation's best interest to provide universal pre-K. I have started off with military women working to secure family leave, first for military women, but for military families in general. So that there is an expansion of parental leave for military families to 16 weeks. That is something that I actually included in this year's, the Senate version of the defense budget. So hopefully that's going to make it through. I've also been working on quite a few pieces of legislation, the Mama Act that has to do with maternal mortality, especially among minority women. And so and this is not just about wealthy versus poor women, but we see time and again that minority women, especially Black women, suffer much higher mortality rates regardless of their socioeconomic status. I've also been working with my colleagues on making sure that we have universal paid family leave in this country, so people can take the time off to take care of their newborn or a family member who's ill, or if you want to foster or adopt a child, that child deserves to have the parent to stay home with them. They didn't choose their situation, so why should they get less time with their parents, their new parents, than a newborn? To a traditional family structure. So we have a lot of work in front of us, and we're going to keep working and rolling up our sleeves.
So this leads to my next question, which is, when you came into office, you were very well respected and well known for your military service, for your efforts in veteran affairs, and of course that continues, as you just talked about. You also serve among your many committee responsibilities. You serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee, but you've also expanded your portfolio. So you were one of the people that was before President Biden announced Kamala Harris, your name was on the short list of people who might be the VP pick. How would you say serving in the Senate has expanded your remit, your causes, your interests? What's happened to you in this time in the Senate?
I would flip that. I think becoming a mother changed me and my causes. And I think that's why representation matters. That's why diversity in elected office matters, why diversity in the Pentagon matters, why diversity in C-suites in corporation matters. Because I was very much a veterans and national security person. Yes, I was a Democrat with progressive values, but family leave and breastfeeding were not anything that I knew anything about other than supporting those causes. But then when I became a mom for the first time, when I was in the House of Representatives and was traveling back and forth twice a week to Illinois, trying to express breast milk, because I was trying to be trying to provide breast milk to my daughter, and I couldn't express breast milk, and I was told, well, go pump your milk plugged in to where those guys are charging their cell phones. That's when the aha moment came on in my head, and I realized I need to pass legislation that mandates lactation stations in all of our airports, and that's now law. So if you travel around the country and you see one of those lactation rooms, you have my daughter Abigail to thank for that, because it was because of her. So I think becoming a mom is what added more things to my portfolio, and getting into the Senate just allowed me to expand and do more on those things. But it's why we have to have more people elected to the Senate with greater diversity. Right now, we have as many white men named John as we do have people of color in the Senate. We still have, less than a quarter of our elected officers are women in our Congress. So until we have full representation, we're going to miss out on experiences and insights that will make us better as a country. Just as I did not have the insight on breastfeeding until I became a mom and was trying to do the very basic things that all traveling moms, with newborns or breastfeeding were trying to do. And that led to the law.
Well, in terms of representation, in fact, you and Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii earlier this year said to the president that you might not vote on some of his appointments if he didn't take seriously the issue of representation. So why did you feel compelled to take that stance?
Well, because the Biden administration is the first administration in 20 years to not have a single cabinet secretary who is Asian Pacific, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. And that's going backwards at a time when the Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander population in this country is the fastest growing demographic, percentage-wise, in the nation. And frankly, it's not acceptable. And as much as I support President Biden and everything the Biden administration is doing, I felt that it was important to point this out to them. And we've had many conversations. And frankly, the responses we were getting were rather flippant and not satisfactory. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I was very, very, very fortunate that the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus stood side by side with Maisie and myself and said, that's right. We need diversity across all of government. And we will stand together as the Tri-Caucus to emphasize the need for more AA and HPI appointees to the highest levels of government.
It's interesting to me, there is sometimes a critique of the Democratic Party that the Republicans have this strength and they're able to work in lockstep and all fall together behind whatever the policy is, whatever the vote is, and that Democrats tend to splinter because of these different interests. Do you think that's a fair or even accurate assessment of the Democratic Party?
Oh, I think we are definitely my big fat Greek wedding family of politics. You know, we have lots of loud conversations and we have lots of disagreements, but I do think we come together in the end. We support working families. We're the party of families that are trying to take their first steps on the rungs of the ladder of the American dream. We are the party of diversity. We are a big tent, and because we are a big tent, that can be a noisy tent with lots of disagreements within the family. But I would rather have that over a single myopic worldview anytime. And I think those disagreements makes us healthier, and it also makes us stronger. As I said, you know, when I first told the Biden administration I wasn't going to vote for any more of their non-diversity nominees until they addressed this issue, Cory Booker was the first person to come out and tweet and in support of me. Maxine Waters supported me, you know, and that diversity of experiences, that intersectionality, to use a buzzword, makes us stronger because we understand, because we've all been there in a different way and we work with one another. So yeah, we have lots of loud discussions in the Democratic Party, but that's a good thing. Those are funner families. Those are fun reunions to go to.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your family in connection to Afghanistan, which at first might seem like an odd connection, but I was struck in reading Every Day is a Gift, your memoir. I didn't know a lot about your childhood and upbringing. I knew that you were born in Thailand and that you lived in different parts of the world, Indonesia and Singapore, and before coming to Hawaii and then living in the United States. But we watched the painful withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan, the end of our time there. And many people invoked the fall of Saigon and the Vietnam War as a kind of parallel to this moment. And as I was reading your memoir, I was struck because, of course, I would look to you to have thoughts about Afghanistan because you were in military service, because you think about, these kinds of issues, the armed forces, et cetera, because you've studied political science and international affairs. But what I didn't know was that you and your family were in Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge was advancing, when civil war was going on, and that you were among the last to leave Phnom Penh as they came into the capital. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about those experiences and how, if at all, they shaped the way you were looking at what was happening in Afghanistan.
Of course they did. Of course they shaped how I thought about Afghanistan and what was happening. So did my military experience. So the two things I did very early on was push very hard to make it clear that we needed to not only get all the Americans out that wanted to leave. I mean, there's still some Americans who have remained behind who are dual citizens, who chose not to go, not to attempt to leave. And I think we're getting more and more of those out as people say, hey, I do want to go. We're continuing to try to get those folks out, but also the SIV, the visa applicants, those Afghanis who worked with us and were the translators and the like. So as a military officer, I knew how critical it is to get those folks out, because number one, we gave them our word. We did not do a good job of that in Vietnam, and we left many, and in Laos as well, and many of those folks died. The ones who got out, I'm glad that we did. In Illinois, actually, in my old congressional district, there's the largest concentrations of Laotians outside of Laos, because we actually did everything we could to get the Laotians who worked with us out of Laos before Laos fell to the communists during this whole Vietnam time period. But yes, I was on the last commercial flight out of Cambodia. My dad was an American working there for the United Nations and for the US government. And we stayed because my dad was sure that the US would never leave. And at the very last moment, we were crouched in the airport, as I write about in my book. I don't remember this, my mom does. I just thought we went to the airport and left. She said, no, we were crouched below the window height as bullets were flying overhead. And thinking back on that, I think about all those families who were desperately going to the Kabul airport to try to leave. And so I lived that experience that happened in Afghanistan. And then I also know how desperately important it is as a soldier to get all who worked with us out of Afghanistan. Our word is no good as a country if we don't do that, because the next conflict that we go into, the next nation that we go into, we go to the locals and say, work with us and we'll take care of you. No one will take our word. No one will believe us if we don't take care of the Afghanis who helped us. I also think it is very important. It's why I signed a letter with other senators to push for special visa status for women who worked in Afghanistan on behalf of women and girls and women's rights, and women, female journalists, the members of the female Afghan National Police, the female Afghan police force. All those folks should be also assisted to get out of the country. Their soccer teams, their female pilots, all of those folks should deserve special help to get out of the country as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Cambodia is instructive also because the sense of just abandonment, right? Like even among people who want to stay there, that there's this feeling of being left to then deal with this threat. And, you know, we've heard from leaders in Pakistan that the international community should not abandon, should work with the Taliban, should form relationships with them. What do you make of that call? Do you agree with that?
I don't trust the Taliban. I don't trust them to live up to, keep their word. And frankly, when President Trump entered into the agreement and signed the accord to reduce U.S. forces to zero, and the deal was we'll reduce our forces to zero if you stop the violence. The Taliban never stopped the violence. So it's like, why would we trust them?
Is this they agreed to not launch any attacks against other countries from Afghanistan? Yes,
but there's a reduction of violence portion of it as well. Okay. And so, the key thing here is that I don't trust the Taliban. They are now in control of the country. And so will we have to deal with them? Yes. I mean, I have an American who is being held hostage by the Haqqani network associated with the Taliban. Mark Freerick said, I'm pushing as hard as I can to negotiate with the Taliban to get him out of there, to retrieve him. So yes, we have to deal with them, but we need to know who we're dealing with and understand that they don't always keep their word, and that and the risks and dangers that are associated with that.
We've just recently marked the 20th anniversary of what we call 9/11 in this country. Do you think that these wars, the so-called war on terror going into Afghanistan or other related conflicts, has this been a mistake?
Well, the mistake came in staying past the original mission in Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, I fully support it. Listen, I was in charge of the only military aviation unit in Chicago when 9/11 happened. And we didn't know if Chicago would be next. We knew that the Pentagon had been hit. We knew that the Twin Towers had been hit. We knew that an aircraft had gone down in Pennsylvania. And I remember Mayor Daley calling, the Illinois National Guard leaders and saying, is the Sears Towers next? Is the Hancock Tower next? I was the commander of the unit at Midway Airport, and I was out of the country. I was in Scotland, and I'm calling recalling my unit to make sure I know where all my pilots are. And my Black Hawks are the only thing that would have stopped anybody coming for the Sears Tower or the Black. So I have a very personal connection to 9/11. So I feel very, very strongly that going into Afghanistan to go after the terrorists who slaughtered those over 2,000 folks on 9/11 was the right thing to do. I did not agree with going into Iraq. I thought that I didn't believe that there were weapons of mass destruction. I thought that was us taking our eyes off the ball in Afghanistan. I've been very clear about my opposition to the war in Iraq, but I served there and I'm proud of my service there, because my service there was my service to America as a military officer. And my commander-in-chief said, this is where you're going to go. The United States Congress voted on it and said, this is where you're going to go. So I'm proud that I went but we haven't done that in Afghanistan for the troops that have been there for the last 20 years. We in Congress have not had the vote, have not lived up to our commitments in reviewing the mission and why they are there. The mission was to go after those who committed 9/11. We did that. We killed Osama bin Laden. And then it switched to some sort of a nation building, ongoing 20-year thing that the United States Congress never bothered to debate or vote upon. And that's where the failure is that we let our troops down here in the legislative branch in not providing the civilian oversight for why they were there.
There are so many questions I want to ask you, and I know that we have to wrap up our conversation, but I mean, it just strikes me, it's amazing to me. It speaks to your fortitude as a human, that a war that you served in, that you didn't believe in, which had, catastrophic implications for you, the physical being shot down in a helicopter and having to recover from catastrophic physical wounds, which, I mean, you've just gone on to lead a remarkable life. And as you said, you didn't imagine that you would be doing all of these first. But I'm just curious what you think in terms of war as a means to security or to peace. I mean, where do you fall on that? Where do we go from here, given that 20 years on, it's not necessarily clear that we're better off than we were when we set out to try and right that wrong?
Yeah, well, let me just say that no true military officer would ever choose war as the first option. And I think that what we should have done in Afghanistan upon successfully getting Osama bin Laden and exiling the Taliban was to then decide, okay, now that that's done, what is this mission? And if this mission is nation building, then we should have put our resources behind the State Department and USAID and all of that, instead of continuing to put money behind the military. It's not the military's job to nation build. They don't know how to make nation build. The military's job is to come in and blow things up and kill the enemy. Their job is not to teach civics. Their job is not to teach government, and people how to be good ministers and parliamentarians. We have apparatus here in the US and in the international community to do that. And we never put the resources behind that. And yes, listen, you read my book. That book was really an explanation to my daughter, Abigail, why my service was worth me losing my legs. Because she asked me that one day. Wow. One night, and because she said, why couldn't somebody as daddy or mommy why couldn't they have been the ones to serve? And I wanted to tell her why America was worth it. So the book is really a love letter to explain why America is worth it and why I would do it all over again. And so all the other things about America is worth it. And all the other things about America that's important is not the military. It's our values. It's who we stand for. It's the principles. Those were the things that we should have been putting resources behind if we truly wanted peace and to nation build in places like, in Afghanistan or Iraq or those other places, not continuing to spend trillions of dollars behind essentially a military occupation. If that's what we want to do as a country, then let's have that vote. If we want to have a permanent military occupation of Afghanistan to make sure that Afghani women and girls can go to school and hold jobs, and we're going to do that by staying there forever, then we need to have that vote in Congress and pass a new authorization for use of military force and say that's what we want.
How do you make that happen?
Huh?
How do you
Well,
make
I've been calling for a debate for a new AUMF for many years now. And I will tell you though, that the Biden administration has indicated their support for re-looking at the AUMFs that are in existence and sunsetting those and coming up with new ones. And this is a bipartisan position. And so I think we get through the pandemic, we get through everything that's going on for the rest of this year. I will continue to be pushing for a look at the AUMFs that still govern what we're doing in Iraq, for example.
Senator Duckworth, it's been a terrific pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your service and for joining us at CHF.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.